Hi, and welcome to the President's Forum podcast. I'm your host, Wesley Smith. Today's conversation features our resident expert and our passionate advocate for military education benefits, Dr. David Scable, who is the president of Excelsior University. Let's get right to the discussion. Hi, David. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Wes. Good to be with you.
Hey, we want to talk today about the way that we serve the men and women in the military in higher education. And I know you're an expert on this issue. Tell us your perspective on supporting these individuals at this time in our country.
So I think it's a great question. And I think supporting the men and women of our military is absolutely critical across the country, right? These are individuals who literally protect the entire United States. Without them, there would be no United States. Let's be clear about that. So making sure that they're well served is really important. And higher ed has done a decent job at supporting our men and women in the military. And there are some schools that have really focused on it. Many of the President's Forum schools that you and I know about obviously do, Excelsior does, and others do. But one of the big challenges has been that although the veteran tuition reimbursement has been very good as a result of the 9/11 GI Bill, the tuition reimbursement for active military has been very poor. It hasn't been increased since 2002. And so today, the average cost of the credit hour across the country, both public and private, is $477 per credit. The Department of Defense reimbursement rate is $250 per credit. And these are individuals who are living paycheck to paycheck. These aren't people who are, bringing home hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so they can't afford to pay extra. So and there are many institutions that are simply saying, we can't honor the $250 credit. You can come here as a military student, but you got to pay full tuition. So the number of schools that are accessible to active military students is shrinking. And that is a real problem.
That's a really interesting point. And I think some people who are listening to this podcast probably don't understand that a lot of schools have opted out in the last 20 years, right? Because it just doesn't cover the tuition rate. So what does that mean for a higher ed institution as you see that gap increase between what the tuition assistance rate is and what actual tuition is at institutions? Tell us how that impacts decision making at institutions of higher education.
Well, I got to tell you, we have this conversation at Excelsior on a regular basis. We are committed to serving active members of the military. They have been part of the Excelsior community since the institution was created in 1971. But what we're doing is we are subsidizing their education on the backs of other students, because $250 is less than what it costs to educate them. And so we're simply taking money, charging other students more to underwrite the cost of what it costs to educate an active military student.
Right.
That's just not right. And so we have been working in DC and with our local legislators, asking for the tuition rate to be increased. And we had hoped that it would be, but it sounds today like that hope has vanished.
It's a very uncertain time in Washington, D.C. right now, especially with regard to budgets. And so I can imagine that, this conversation has to be totally reevaluated based on what's happening right now. There's another issue that plays into this for the men and women in the military, especially those who attend some of the President's Forum institutions. Tell us about the challenges that military students face when their housing allowances are cut while pursuing online education. Can you give us a little bit of the nuance there?
Yeah, so that's another issue, and I'm glad you brought that up. So students, active military students who live in various geographic areas throughout the country, get housing allowances based on the cost of living in those geographic areas. So if you live in New York City, for example, your cost of living is very different than if you live in Buffalo, right?
Right.
And so, but nevertheless, students get a housing allowance relative to the cost of living in their community. If you take online classes, you get no housing allowance.
Because if you go to school online, you don't have to live anywhere, right?
Apparently you don't have to live anywhere. So it's crazy. And so it creates another disincentive. And of course, especially for active military students, as you and I
Right.
know, these folks have to have online education because not only is it important because they often move, right? They often get moved
Deployed.
from base to base or community to community. But if they're deployed, they need the flexibility of online education.
Right.
If you find yourself in the Middle East and you're able to access your courses, the only way you can do it is through online education. And so making that available to students and not penalizing them, which is exactly what is happening right now by not giving them the housing allowance, we need to change that.
Right.
These are really fundamental issues that have to be changed. I'll add one other thing. We've done surveys with active military students asking them what led you to enlist? What's most important to you? Um, Tuition benefits are one of the top two things: tuition and medical insurance. Those are the two top things that lead
Right.
them to enlist.
Yeah, it makes no sense for recruitment that the benefit, one of the benefits that is the leading indicator of recruitment, that is higher education benefits, is becoming less and less relevant. And we've outlined two ways that that's happening in both tuition assistance not keeping up with inflation and the inability to have a housing allowance if you opt into one of the most effective ways to receive an education if you're in the military, which is online.
Well, not only one of the most effective, often the only.
The only option. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Well, we have a lot going on in Washington D.C. We started kind of this conversation a while back talking about what's happening in D.C. There is some uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. What Tell us the best thing that the President's Forum can be doing right now on this particular issue. Is it just remaining constant and helping people understand that this issue is not going away, and that to protect our country and to increase enlistments, that this has to happen?
I think that's the best we can do. Communicating and explaining to members of Congress and members of the administration the direct connection between the benefits that active military students receive and the ability to actually recruit them, right? We know, for example, that recruitment is down in the Army and it's down in other branches of the military. Um, if this country had to go to war, it's unclear that we actually have enough personnel to be able to deploy. And so ensuring that we have a strong, robust military with enough personnel and well-trained personnel, educated personnel, not just trained in military tactics, but able to communicate with each other, able to talk to people in other countries. These are really, really important abilities that our military has been known for a long time. We need to make sure that that strength continues.
David, I couldn't agree more. Thank you for joining us. I want to remind our listeners of two things that are happening here in the month of March. Number one, we will be back in Washington, D.C. with more than a dozen of the President's Forum leaders. And we will be talking about these issues with both administration leaders as well as congressional leaders. So that's number one. Number two, the President's Forum will be publishing the President's Forum 2025 policy agenda. And that will also include these issues that will be, front and center on our policy agenda. And the forum is dedicated to advancing this and keeping the conversation going regardless of where the conversation goes generally in DC. This is something that has to remain on the agenda.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm, proud to be part of the President's Forum. This is important work, and I know that we all support our military colleagues and want to do everything we can to continue to support them.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you, David, for joining. And for our listeners who are out there listening, please join us as we try to advance these issues at the President's Forum. We invite you to visit our website at presidentsforum.org and to follow us on social media.